All right, Mr. Simons, we are live and it's over to you.
Hey, good morning, everybody. On behalf of Mike Woolley and Tom Williams, Richard Anderson, and many of our independent contractors and associates, Venue Solutions Group is pleased to be able to present another webinar in our Back to Work with Confidence series. We had such a really great turnout and good dialogue from the first one, and I really want to set higher expectations for this opportunity with Paul today. So thank you for being here. We'll be back at the end for some Q&A. And so at this point, I'd like to welcome Rip Ripito, who is the chairman of the board of IAVM.
Thanks, Russ. We sure appreciate everything that Venue Solutions Group is doing, and the continuation of this with us now being able to partner together on ways that can move us forward post-pandemic. I believe that there are two words right now that apply more than ever when we think about IAVM and our industry as a whole. Regardless of sector, it's about purpose and promise. And purpose for IAVM is to educate, advocate for, and inspire assembly venue professionals worldwide. And our promise is to be able to provide unprecedented member value. So over this past year and for the time to come for a while, at least, we're going to be required to envision how we can live out this purpose and promise post-pandemic. And so I've asked our staff at headquarters to find ways of assessing our member value and to work to anticipate the kind of approaches we might need to take. And I believe we're going to see near-term and long-term paradigm shifts in how we operate. And so one of those ways of us being able to see paradigm shifts is collaborating and coming together in ways that haven't been done before, thus the way that you see the partnership today. So we're so grateful for Venue Solution Group and all the efforts. And with that, I'm going to toss it to Richard and wish you all a very good day. And I hope you enjoy this as much as I know the rest of us will. So thank you much.
And Rip, thanks so much for joining us and for all you're doing and your leadership. I think most people don't understand that when you become chair of the IAVM, it's not a weekend commitment for a couple of weeks. It's a 4-year and actually longer commitment. And I speak on behalf of everyone associated. You and the leadership team and the staff have just done a phenomenal job helping all of us navigate and get through what has been more than a little difficult. So thank you. Thanks for all the time you've committed and volunteered along with the others. And we'll keep listening and following your lead. So
thanks, Richard.
Yeah, with that, welcome everyone again on top of what Russ said. And also, before we kick it over to Paul, I want to remind you that on your screen, you have an opportunity for questions and answers. And so you're going to hear, and I'm not just saying this, it has the benefit of being true. You can hear some phenomenal insights from Paul, and questions are going to pop up. Go ahead and type them in as you hear them. Or as you think of them, because we'll be monitoring those. And when we get to about the 45-minute mark, plus or minus whenever Paul is wrapping it up, we'll give a quick update about what's coming. And then we're going to stay on with Paul for as long as there are questions. Russ will lead that, and that's typically a really phenomenal part of it. So with that, it's my great pleasure and privilege to introduce Paul. I've known Paul a long time, as many of you have. He's iconic in our industry for not only his leadership and passion and knowledge, but also his presentation skills and his efforts. So without further ado, Paul, take it away, and thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of share our story and do whatever we can to take what we've learned and what we've done at AT&T Stadium over the past year and share it out to the industry to help our fellow colleagues. I'm going to go ahead and put my presentation up now and share my screen. And there we go. So hopefully you're seeing my screen now. So the idea here is that we wanted to kind of tell the story of what we've been doing at AT&T Stadium, because we have been operating events throughout the pandemic. We hosted a full season of NFL games. So we had 8 home games. There weren't any preseason games this last year, but we were able to host all of our NFL games with fans in attendance. We also hosted a drive-through or a drive-in movie festival in one of our parking lots back in July, so on the early onset. We were lucky enough to get started with Monster Jam back in October. This was the first time that Feld got back out on the road and started presenting their events was with us back in October. We also presented the PBR World Finals. This event, pardon me, this event typically has been presented in Las Vegas, and Las Vegas wasn't allowing spectators, and they really wanted their event to have spectators, so they went shopping for a place where they could do it. And we've had a long relationship with PBR, and we were really fortunate to host 4 days of their World Final event. We also hosted in December a big boxing match as well. And we were also host of the Texas High School State Football Championships, which is an event that we've been doing pretty much every year. We're doing different setting this year, but still 5 days. Some days were one session with multiple games. Other days were multiple sessions with multiple games where we actually cleared out the stadium, cleaned it, and then had a second ticketed event for a second game. We also hosted the Big 12 Championship in December and the Cotton Bowl game, which is an annual game for us as well at AT&T Stadium. And lastly, we were very fortunate in order to host the Rose Bowl game. Now, I grew up in Southern California and went to events and went to UCLA football games at the Rose Bowl, and even went to a couple of Rose Bowl games. It would never dawn on me that I would be living in Texas, working at a Texas venue, and get to host the Rose Bowl game. But again, they wanted to have this event with fans in California. They weren't able to do that, and so moving the game to AT&T Stadium made a lot of sense for the event organizers, and we were honored to be able to do that and had a great time packing this in. Just so you know where it kind of fell, we had a Cowboys game on a Sunday, we had the Cotton Bowl game on a Wednesday, and then we had the Rose Bowl game on Friday. So it was a busy week that week. So we've been busy. We've been hosting fans, and we've been doing pretty much a full run of events, concerts and other touring acts. They obviously canceled or they rescheduled their dates, but we kept moving forward. What I want to do is kind of start from the beginning. So about a year ago, back on March 18th, much like all of our other venues around the country, we went ahead and we closed. And so our pro shop, our retail store, our tour operation, which is a daily thing that we do, all of our private events, they ceased. They were either postponed or canceled or rescheduled. And then we ran the building with only essential personnel. So our maintenance and engineering folks, some of our cleaning staff and security were the ones that were pretty much in the building, and everybody else went and started working from home. Pretty typical, like everybody else did. One of the things that the Cowboys did as soon as we shut down was they started to ask the question, let's get ready to reopen. We didn't know when or if or what under what condition we were going to be able to reopen. Just like everybody else, there's no game plan for this, but we wanted to be prepared. So the Cowboys launched a task force in early April with only about 2 weeks of us kind of trying to sort things out. We got started on planning for our reopening. So the Cowboys organization convened this task force, and it had representatives from all the different departments throughout the Cowboys organization. AT&T Stadium is owned and operated by the Dallas Cowboys. So we, as a stadium operations group, we are part and parcel of the Cowboys organization, and we lean on all of the other elements of the Cowboys organization to help our operation. So it made sense that we put together a unified task force to address the issue of not just when will events return to AT&T Stadium, but how do we get people from working from home back in the office? And we're obviously connecting with the NFL as well to make sure we understand their requirements and how we can move forward. So you can see here this task force has a representative from every different department or every major partner, like Legends, our food and beverage and retail partner at the stadium, so that we had everybody on board. And the task force responsibilities were these: to connect with our state, federal, and local officials to make sure that we understood what the situation was, what requirements we were going to likely need to meet, and to make sure that we had that ongoing connection with them. The other thing was to coordinate all of the activities that everybody was going to be doing, and make sure that we had a unified plan, that people were communicating, that decisions weren't being made in isolation. Because as we all know, things that we do may impact other departments in ways that we're not aware of, because we're most familiar with our own direct operation. But having a task force like task force like this helps make sure that everybody's got a voice at that table. The other thing is this task force is make sure that all of the necessary plans and opportunities for us to get prepared were in place, were being worked on, and were being followed once they were developed and adopted. And then lastly, the task force was assigned with our ongoing assessment. As the situation changed and as our public health condition evolved, it was the job of this task force to stay connected with that and understand that our plans are continuing to evolve, that we're still adhering to those, and that we're making plans to stay open as long as we can. Now, also rewinding back to June, we hosted high school graduations. This was the first thing that we did. In the first weekend of June, we went ahead and opened up and held high school graduations, several graduations in a particular day. So I think we had 3 days of 3 graduations each. So a cycle of 9 graduations. We did it socially distanced, and you can see that here. This is what it looked like with the graduates on the field and their presentation stage, and then the audience socially distanced throughout the seating bowl there. The things that we put into place, because this was our first event out of the gate, are many of the things that we're still doing and that are kind of the basis of all of our operations. So you can see here, we did the social distancing. We had a socially distanced reserved seating plan. We had health questionnaires for our staff. We did temperature checks for the staff. What we didn't do was temperature checks for the public. And there was a lot of discussion around that. And I know some venues that were hosting fans were doing temperature checks, and we considered that. But also knowing that the way the COVID-19 was presenting itself was that you could be asymptomatic, you could be infectious, and you wouldn't be running a temperature. So there wasn't necessarily a real value we saw in doing that process for all of the fans. We were also very concerned about the time, space, and resources it would take in order to affect that screening for guests when they were coming in. So we opted to do, and we did this in coordination with our local authorities and also with the school and the state's educational authority, was to say that if you were a guest and you were using a ticket to come to these graduations, then you were attesting that you were not sick, that you don't believe that you've been exposed, that you are, and that you don't actively have COVID. So by use of the ticket, and there was a disclaimer involved when they actually accepted the tickets, that where they acknowledged that as well. That's how we handled that. But a lot of these other elements are things that have carried over into the operations that we did into the fall with football and all of the other events that we had. One of the things that we also did was we contracted with this company to do disinfecting of the stadium and to put in their product, which is kind of a durable antimicrobial, antibacterial coating that goes onto high touch, high contact surfaces. I'm not endorsing this. I'm just, as a point of information, letting you know that this is what we did. You know, anytime I talk about this stuff and I say, well, we did this thing, people want to know, well, who did you use? So again, this is just for your information. Again, not an endorsement, but the way we leverage this is we try to make sure that our guests understand that these areas, while we maintain them, have also been specially treated, so that they can be in the building and they can move throughout the building and experience an event with confidence, knowing that we are engaging with professionals in the industry when it comes to health and hygiene and cleanliness. Another thing that we did was the screening for staff, and how we manage the access to the building for staff. And we use these, we use the Certify program and their units, these Snap XTs. Again, I know there's a lot of different technologies out there, and some of them can be quite costly, but we went with this, and the way this, if you're not familiar with this, I'll just walk you through it real quick, just so you have an understanding of how we process this information. Our requirement was that when you come into the building, you have had to complete a health questionnaire. And so this system allows you to deliver that health questionnaire electronically. On the back end, you register people and their cell phone numbers, their email addresses, what have you. It'll push out a link to them. They can get this. This is an example from getting it in your as a text message. You click into that, it opens up your browser with this questionnaire. You fill out the questionnaire, and in the back end, you decide what the questions are. You decide what a pass or a fail, acceptable or unacceptable response is to each question, or an overall score. Once you complete that, and it's been accepted, you'll get a confirmation QR code, which gives the name of the person and also time and date stamps the QR code when it's issued. Then that person brings it up and scans it on the device. It first reads the barcode. It recognizes that the person has registered, they've completed and passed their self-report health screening. And then it will also scan you for your temperature and respond, with the temperature screening as well. And you can change that set point, whether it's, 100.3 or whatever, to alert that the person has a temperature that's registered too high. So that's one of those systems that we used. We also went after and early was early to receive these certifications from GBAC and the Well Health Safety rating as well. So this was important because we wanted to know what would be the industry standards out there. So it was really important for us to understand these certifications and to achieve them. It helped us make sure that we were following those standards and practices, and that we could also hold this up as something that we did to help win the confidence of our staff, win the confidence of people coming to events at the stadium as well. So before we launched into, look, we were in Texas. The Texas governor allowed us to have fans, and I'll speak to what has happened in the last 24 hours within Texas, because if you don't think my phone isn't blowing up and we're having questions about what's going on now, we're trying to sort that all out right now. But being in Texas and being given the opportunity to actually have fans, we wanted to make sure that people understood, whether they were our staff, they were our event clients, they were the teams or whatnot, that health and safety was our top priority. So we wanted to make sure that we messaged and that we leveraged this very closely, and we made sure that these folks were aware that we wouldn't be doing this if we didn't believe that we could do it safely and taking into consideration their health and their safety as well. So we work closely with the federal government. We work closely with our state resources as well. When it came to the NFL, we were, of course, hand in hand with the NFL or our event clients or the State Educational Association, and then also with our local authorities. And our local authorities really became the ones that we spent most of our time with to make sure they were giving us the guidance and they were understanding what our plans were. But the NFL, as we planned to come back to work, the NFL had a number of requirements that we had to comply with. The first one was their business operating guidelines. When everything shut down in March, the league wanted to make sure that there was uniformity across the league and there wasn't any competitive advantage, because different states were allowing people to be in the workplace and some states weren't. So they had really strict mandates about who could be actually in your offices, whether it's player personnel, coaches, or it's even your sponsorship people. So there was a whole set of guidelines that they produced that we had to make sure that we were monitoring and that we were adhering to as well. They also had a stadium preparedness guidelines, which meant that as we got ready to have games at our building, whether they were attended by fans or not, there were a lot of things that we had to do to make sure that we prepared to the NFL standards, to make sure, mostly around the team and football operations, that we created this bubble and that we were able to make sure that we contained any kind of exposure or boundaries between football operations and then the public or stadium working personnel. Those of you who work in the NFL, at an NFL venue, know that the NFL has their best practices for stadium security. This is an annual, you go through an annual audit as well, and they augmented these practices as well to account for COVID-19 and all of the pandemic-related controls they wanted to have, both if you were hosting fans or if you were not hosting fans. And then lastly, the infectious disease emergency response plan. The NFL provided a template for this, which basically was for each team to submit a plan that said, this is what we're doing to protect against infections. And if we do have an infection that is tied back to our team, our facilities, our stadiums, whatnot, this is how we plan on responding to that. So that EIDR plan became an important part of what we were responsible for as well. So that takes care of that part of the kind of outside regulation. What were we going to do internally? And when it came to ticket sales, so we announced last year that it was a non-season ticket year. We were basically going to give everybody a release from their seat license agreements and their obligation to buy their season tickets, and tack on an additional year to their agreement. So all the season ticket holders, and at AT&T Stadium, our 80,000 seats in the stadium are basically all season tickets. There's very few that are untagged as season tickets. So it's virtually our entire inventory. So well, and knowing that we were likely going to be able to bring people back, but at a much reduced capacity, we had to try to figure out how to accommodate that. So what we did was we released them from the obligation. So we didn't have an obligation to deliver tickets to them. We created an opt-in opportunity. So season ticket holders could say, yeah, I want the chance to buy. And I think we had about a 40% take rate on that. And then we went on sale to those season ticket holders, and we allowed them to buy up to 3 games, and that was based on the numbers that we had opt-in and the size of the accounts that they represented. And then after that period was done, we went on sale to the general public. Resale of tickets was still allowed, so all of their ticket transactions, once you owned a ticket, you could resell it through SeatGeek, which is our ticketing purveyor, or through other third parties, as people typically did. Our luxury suites were a slightly different story. Our local authorities allowed us to have basically full capacity in our suites. We also have a standing room component in our suites, but we didn't use that. So it was basically capped at the 1 ticket per seat in the suite, and that capacity varies throughout the building. But we have over 300 suites in our building, and so it represents a huge part of our attendance. And typically for a Cowboys game with all of the suite inventory available, non-COVID, you're talking about 8,000 or 9,000 people in just suites alone. So being able to preserve that as an opportunity to sell and to allow our suite holders to make use of their suites was really important. We also did the same thing with our suite holders regarding their agreements. There wasn't an obligation, but they had the opportunity to purchase their suites. We did offer to put a suite attendant in each suite. Normally that's an additional cost to the suite holder. If they don't hire one into their suite, then that suite attendant is shared among a couple of suites. But this time we actually provided one if they were going to use their suite, so that that person could serve as a bartender or serve as a food server within their suite, and reduce the touch points that their suite guests would have to experience. And then, of course, face masks were required in the suites as well. They didn't have any special release from those requirements. So let me talk a little bit about the socially distanced reserved seating and how we handled that. We refer to it as pods. So pods are those groupings of seats, and then there's a buffer zone around them. And then our configuration was anywhere from 2 to 10 seats. And just figuring that out was a huge endeavor. We contracted with a service to help us with a lot of the modeling of what things look like if we went with a certain number of 2 seats or 4 or 6. And over the course of the season, what we learned was that many of our big pods were not necessary. They weren't being sold. So we carved up some of those. We did a few adjustments to our seating plan so that we had more 2 and 4 seat seating pods. I know that was one of the things that we learned. The idea here was to create buffer zones so guests aren't walking in front of each other, and that when they're seated, they're able to have that 6-foot distance from anyone else. And the final authority on this was our fire chief. Our fire chief looked at our plan and basically understood how we were configuring things, how people were moving throughout the building. He was very comfortable with the buffer zones that we were setting up, and he signed off on the final manifest. And we've been using that manifest for all of the events that we've been doing since we started with the NFL games back in September. Here's a look at some attendance from our first couple of games. So right out from the very first game, the Cowboys versus Falcons, we had 21,708 people, a little bit more for the Browns. If you're familiar with how the Cowboys did last season, I'm not quoting additional attendance records. We don't have to, but attendance did drop off a little bit. We attributed that a bit to team performance, but still it was very robust, very strong. And our food and beverage company, Legends, reported that they've had the highest per caps in record at AT&T Stadium when we had the smaller crowd. So overall revenue, of course, wasn't high, but people were spending more. They were going, they were buying more, they were getting in line, and they were purchasing more food and beverage in these smaller crowds. The meat of what I really wanted to talk to you about today and share out was this branded messaging campaign that we used to kind of wrap everything up and to advance what we were doing at AT&T Stadium as we were presenting events. And that's what we call Safe Stadium. And that's why this presentation we're talking about our Safe Stadium story. So this branded messaging campaign encompassed all of the different things that we were doing, and they were represented graphically through icons that are on the web, in signage throughout the stadium, and they represent all of the different kind of policies and practices that we were following as a unified package to help present a safe environment for all of our guests. So how did we get this out there? How did we advance our Safe Stadium initiative? So of course, there's the website, the Cowboys website, and we created a special site, the Safe Stadium site here, where you can get all of your know before you go information. And this information would also be sent to ticket holders in the email that goes out to them on Friday before a home game. But you'll see here that, you know, we're positioning this so that it helps inspire our guests to understand and comply with what these requirements are about protecting themselves, protecting the team, showing up when you're only well, understanding what social distancing means and why it's so important, the pod seating, and so they understand that you have to sit where you're ticketed, and we want to make sure that we keep you from violating those pod boundaries. Let me take a moment here and just talk a little bit about that. One of the innovations that we got out of our COVID experience that we're going to carry over definitely into the future when hopefully we return to whatever normal operations is the way we handle seat relocates. When we had people that came in that needed a seat relocate for whatever reason, whether they couldn't handle the altitude in the upper concourse in the 400 level, or they needed a special accommodation because they were temporarily disabled with a cast or on their leg or something like that, they would go and get a seat relocate. And like many venues, they go to a guest services booth, they talk to a ticketing agent there, the ticketing agent does an exchange, and we work with whatever inventory is available, and that ticketing agent tries to understand what their need is. Well, we knew we were going to have an additional challenge with this, because we knew that even though the tickets were sold in pods, that it's very likely on the secondary market they might get broken up. So somebody buys 4 tickets, and even though they've been admonished, don't break these up into 2 pairs and sell them to unknown parties, that happens, and it happens with some regularity. So we automated and went touchless with our way of doing seat relocates. So now fans can shoot a QR code on a sign at the guest services booth. We also put the QR code on all of the event brief sheets. So our staff, the usher right there, can say, shoot this QR code, and then that will put them into the system where they can interact with the ticket office, and they can get their seat relocate process through the ticket office and new tickets sent to their ticketing account. And so that's been great, because it takes that traffic away from our guest services booth. It makes it completely touchless. It puts everybody in a common queue. The ticket office has 100% view of what's going on. So instead of working in 4 isolated locations with a limited ticketing inventory, they can then triage what the seat relocate needs are and then process them and interact with the fans. And the fans don't have to go anywhere. They can literally just stand in the seating bowl, and within a few minutes they'll get a response and they'll get their new tickets and they can go to their new seat location. So that's worked out really well, and we're really pleased with that. And it's all just a smart sheet application. And if you want more details on that, I'll try to sort that out. But that's one of the things that I know we're keeping with. Mobile only ticketing. We had been heavily invested in mobile ticketing, with only our suites really still being hard tickets that we were sending out. We just pulled the trigger and went 100% mobile ticketing. Now, one of the things we had to build into that was we developed and we've launched a mobile ticketing assistance team. So we've got part-time game day staff, our event staff, that are specially trained in mobile ticketing, that are outside the gates and entries to the stadium. They're wearing a vest that says mobile ticketing assistance, so that if fans are having trouble pulling up their tickets on their mobile device or transferring the tickets, because we ask them to put your own ticket on your own device, so that as you move around the building, you have your own ticket. If they're having trouble doing that, we can deal with them and get them ready to go. So by the time they get up to security screening and ticket taking, those matters are resolved, and we're not sending them to the ticket office for resolution. We're helping them right there on the spot. So that was another thing, and we'll continue to use that mobile ticketing assistance team in the future as well. Cashless transactions, we were looking at this for a while, and because there were so many benefits of it with COVID, we went ahead and just went cashless, literally pretty much overnight. People were told, as we were getting ready to come in for the NFL season, AT&T Stadium is now 100% cashless. So bring your card, don't bring cash. We do not have any card to or cash to card machines or reverse ATMs. We looked at that closely. They're very expensive in order to get into your venue, and our research showed that it just really wasn't worth the expense. So we've gone cashless without any other really accommodation. Now, we are right across the street from a big Walmart. So if people are really jammed up, we will scan them out, let them go to Walmart and get, you know, a card from them, and they can come and use that card in our building. But we've had very few complaints about this, and really it's been a huge benefit. And this is all the way from parking through merchandise, concessions, everything is cashless. You know, we even don't take cash in the vending machines at the employee break areas anymore. So it's all cards, no cash. And that's been great, because not only does it reduce the theft that may be going on and some of the other skimming and scamming, but also it's reduced our investment in police resources, because we don't have to have police officers doing cash escorts throughout the building during the course of an event or following an event. So it's really been a huge benefit all the way around. Tailgating, we've thinned that out a bit, and I'll show you some pictures of that. Staffing protocols is basically all the things that our staff need to do. And lastly, food and beverage, making sure that we're packaging food and beverage items so that they help protect those items from any kind of contamination and keep everything sanitary. So another thing that we did was we produced a briefing video that went out on our website, and also we play this in the stadium as well, and a link was sent to all the season ticket holders. So to give you a break from listening to me talk for a while, I'm going to go ahead and play this video. It's only a couple minutes, but it really does tell the whole story and how we positioned it to the public. And this also became an important tool for our staff as well, so they understood the message as well. So we obviously shared this out with them. So we'll go ahead and launch this.
Hi, I'm Charlotte Jones, Chief Brand Officer of the Dallas Cowboys. We're ready for football, and we know you are too. We couldn't be more excited to welcome you back to AT&T Stadium. This is our house, and we've gone above and beyond to make sure your game day experience is in a safe environment without sacrificing the excitement of the game you've grown to expect from the Dallas Cowboys. AT&T Stadium will be open to limited capacity as we follow all the latest guidelines from the CDC, NFL, and the state of Texas to ensure your safe return to football action. So let's take a look at what you can expect on game day. Before you even arrive, every employee at the stadium is given an extensive wellness screening. We disinfect all seating and surface areas throughout the stadium to ensure a safe and healthy environment. We've also added over 300 hand sanitizer stations in convenient locations. All fans and employees are required to wear face coverings. Your masks are required as soon as you get out of your car. And if you're experiencing any symptoms of being sick, please stay home and keep others safe. We'll see you next time. When arriving at your gate, safe distancing guidelines will be in effect. In order to create a safer, frictionless entry, mobile-only ticketing will be used. So be sure to access your digital tickets prior to arriving. This helps everyone get through the gates quickly. Tickets will be issued in pods for friends and family to maintain a safe distance between trusted groups while watching the game. As an added layer of safety, we've also switched to a 100% cashless system. And at our concessions, orders are placed into protective to-go packaging to ensure extra peace of mind. For your convenience, we've also installed signage throughout our stadium as a reminder of our new safety procedures. Thank you in advance for your cooperation. It's about your safety as well as the safety of others. And it's always about giving our Cowboys fans the most amazing game day experience imaginable, the Cowboys way. We take our football seriously, but more importantly, we take the health and safety of our fans and employees seriously. We want to make sure when you come to our house, you can feel confident you're taken care of. Now, who's ready for some football?
So there you go. So that was the video piece that's been kind of our standard bearer for all of the efforts that we've maintained throughout the last season of events here. So I want to cover on just show you some visuals on how we did that. So first of all, we want people to stay at home if they're not feeling well, And that applies, of course, to our staff and the staff screening. One of the things that we need to take into account for was that while some of the staff were screened using this method, we have thousands of staff that are coming to work at the stadium, which is another thing to keep in mind, is that while we were only operating with about 25% capacity from fans, we're still requiring about 80% of our staffing resources. The building was being fully utilized. All the seating sections were being used. They just weren't being used to capacity. So we still had to have all the ushers, escalator attendants, elevator operators, screeners at the gates. The only thing that really changed was the number of staff at the gates, because you're processing a much smaller crowd. But so we had lots of staff that we still needed to have checked in. So one of the things we needed to do was look at that process. And you can see here is a picture from one of our parking lots. And this is the added layer of check-in for the staff. Now, the way the Cowboys organization decided to move forward with the staff screening was that we placed this responsibility on each of our staffing partners, or each of our stadium partners, so that they would have to be responsible for conducting the health screening questionnaire and making sure that that staff member passed whatever method they were using. So since they're their employees and not ours, we wanted to make sure that we kept that responsibility with those service partners. And you can see here what we did was we set up this check-in process where you see the staff member here getting their temperatures checked as they're in line getting ready to go through that check-in process for stadium people there. So we had to set up this compound in one of our nearby parking lots as kind of an intermediary check-in process. So the staff would park in a nearby parking lot. This would be on their way to the stadium. They would stop in this parking lot, queue up at their vendor tent, go through the check-in process. They would get a wristband that was unique for that day that said that they had cleared their initial check-in procedure. They could then go to the stadium itself and go through security screening, showing their wristband that they had done their health questionnaire, they had passed the temperature screening, and then they would be admitted and they would go through whatever reporting and briefing and deployment process that particular operation had. So one of the lessons that we learned is that you really have to look at every aspect of your operation and think about time, space, resources to get these additional things accomplished, because it's just there are going to be things that you will additionally do that you didn't do prior to COVID. So we, of course, need to do this. Now, this is outdoors. This works when the weather is reasonable, but when it's rainy, we had to come up with a rain plan. So we actually moved this operation into the stadium on one of our concourses. It's not ideal, but it's a lot better than making the staff stand out in the rain as they go through their check-in process. So we only had to activate that a couple of times. But again, it shows you come up with a plan, then you've got to come up with a plan for that plan in case there are other contingencies as well. Looking at tailgating, we allow tailgating only in the periphery of our parking lot. So we did it socially distanced by saying every other space. So we thinned things out. We also told people we didn't want combined tailgate parties, basically tailgate with your pod. That was the message there. Wearing masks. Now, this was a big challenge, and it was a big part of what we were working on throughout the season. And I know some of my colleagues at other venues that were hosting fans struggle with this as well. So they're required for all working personnel, required for all guests. Children under 10 did not have that requirement. If a guest said that they had some sort of medical condition that made wearing a mask unsafe for them, we allowed them to go without a mask, and we didn't require anything more of that. Just their attestation that they had a medical condition was fine with us. And then, of course, this removal only when you're actively eating or drinking, which is a very subjective thing. And so it's hard because people might just be holding a beer, and that's their way of living life in the seating bowl without their mask on. There were a lot of other fans that felt like, well, I'm in this position of safety because I'm sitting in my pod, I'm 6 feet away from others, so I don't need to wear my mask. And if you paid attention to the CDC and the science as we learned more about the COVID-19 and how it was spread, people jumping up and down and screaming and shouting, there are droplets that can get launched from your mouth, and they could serve as a way of infecting others. So we're trying to get people to make sure that they wore their mask as much as possible. And the phrase that we gave our staff was, if they encountered somebody and they said, "Can you please put your mask on," or "Remember to wear your mask," and the guest was, "Well, look, I'm drinking or I'm eating," and we told the staff, just encourage the guests, we want you to wear your mask as much as possible. So as much as you possibly can, please keep it on. We appreciate your compliance there. For guests that showed up that didn't have masks, we had staff outside the gates and entries with complimentary masks, so we were handing those out. And then as a reminder, in the seating bowl, we had these paddle signs that we created for all of our ushers, which had 2 messages on them. One side, it was mask up, and on the other side, it was a reminder about seating pods. Because we did have some people that would go when they would sit in areas that they weren't ticketed for. And so we want to make sure we encourage that behavior as well. So the staff would just simply walk the aisles and show their paddle signs. It was a way to kind of, politely and non-verbally remind people to wear their masks without having to get in their face and without having to have an actual verbal interaction with them. And fans generally responded pretty well to that. Social distancing, a number of things that we did to social distance. Starting out at the gates, we put stickers down on the ground so that people knew where to queue up and had visual prompts about spacing as they were queuing up. We also went with every other magnetometer. So you can see there's a gate that's open, then a gate that's shut. So we're keeping socially distanced at each of the security screening checkpoints. Our elevators, making sure that we weren't overcrowding the elevators. We do put an operator on every elevator, whether it's a freight elevator or a public elevator. So really helping make sure people understood, that it's going to be slow go on the elevators because we've got to keep things contained in there and we can't overpopulate the elevators. We did some traffic management in our restrooms where we had a place to put entry only and exit only on restroom flow. We did that as well. On our wheelchair and companion platforms, we put in partitions. So our maintenance and engineering team became experts in plexiglass partition fabrication. They would get the raw materials and fabricate all of these partitions that went onto our platforms in the press box between each of the workstations, in our command spaces between the workstations. There was a lot of plexiglass all around. Here you can see some of the decals on the floor. And then also some of the shields that are on the counters. And these are just simply sitting on the counter, or some of them they're attached above and they're hanging from chains, so they're not permanently installed. They can be removed. Here's a picture of what it looks like on the concourse there. Shut off our drinking fountains, and then we have these drink rails throughout the building, and so these can be gathering points. So we closed those and we told people we didn't want you gathering around there because we didn't want to have to manage social distancing around those as well. Just another look at one of the counters with their with the shield that's been placed, and then you can see the self-service cashless only device on the counter there as well. Seating pods. So here's how we did it with the seating pods. Is we zip tied the seats that were not to be occupied, and so that would deter people from sitting in them. However, we would have instances where people were breaking zip ties and we'd have to go and clear seats out. We had to, instruct the staff what to look for visually. You could pretty much spot when somebody was violating the pod seating, and you could then go and ask to see their tickets. And if they were not in the right place, then we would get them to their right place. When we opened for the start of the season, our first couple of games, we had a towel giveaway, and so the rally towels, and so we put them in the seats that were occupied. This was great because it gave me some really good visuals here to show you how the socially distanced seating works. So where you see the white in here, those are seats that are going to be occupied. So you can see how they're kind of dotted with the different size of seating pods, and then here's what it looks like throughout the stadium there, and then here's what it looks like with people actually populating them. Now, in our seating bowl, we did have to put seat covers in the first few rows. The NFL required that we create a buffer zone between the people that are on the field because they went through a testing regimen and they were basically part of that isolation bubble. So in order to create that boundary, we had to tarp over the first 5 rows of seats. And then also our field clubs and our field suites were also tarped over. At AT&T Stadium, we have field level suites and we have 2 field level clubs. So those were not going to be able to be accessed by guests. And so those were tarped over. If you were a suite owner that had one of those suites and you wanted a suite for the season, I think our suite department was able to get you moved to a different location for the season. And then all the sideline media personnel, they were relegated to what was called the operational zone, which is basically that in front of the first row. And then you see the wheelchair platform that's at the 50-yard line that we have in our building. So that's where all the sideline media would work in that space there. So we'd have to have security that was keeping that secure so fans didn't come down and violate that zone. And we kept that free of guests. And here's what it looked like on the end zone. So I want to close and kind of wrap up my prepared remarks here to talk a little bit about staff training and what we did. So one of the requirements that the NFL had was to provide a training to all working personnel of the stadium so that they knew what their responsibilities were as a working person at the stadium under these new guidelines. And so the league made that mandate, but they didn't provide the training materials. It was up to every team or every stadium to actually decide how they were going to do that. And the league also required that you keep a record of that training so that they could run an audit, and they could say, well, if you had this person working that day, show me evidence that they had that training. And this applied to everybody. This applied to everybody from nonprofit groups to your ushers in the seating bowl to also broadcast and media personnel. So everybody had to do this. So this was a huge problem to solve because you have to create something, and then you have to deal with distribution, and you have to deal with documentation. And so the way that we chose to do this was we researched a solution, and I'll share with you with that in just a second. But this training, what it covered was, the way we built the training was, number one, we talked about the stadium protective measures. We talked about the working staff responsibilities, and this was really the meat of the requirements from the league that said that if you're working in the stadium, you need to do these things like wearing a mask, don't come to work if you're not well, all those things that really applied to guests, but are even more kind of forceful for working personnel. And then because many of our game day procedures or event day procedures changed to accommodate check-in and other things, we wanted to make sure that they were aware of that as well. So this training covered that as well. Now, so that was the mandated training, and we got that started and underway. And then we realized we needed to, for all of our staff that interacted with our fans, we needed to come up with basically a guest services training as well. So we created this Supporting Safe Stadium Guidelines for Game Day Staff. And what this did was this actually told the staff, here's how to interpret the rules, and here's how we want you to interact with our fans. And so that training went out to not all personnel, but just staff like in security and guest services, everybody who was going to have kind of an interaction with our customers. And that training had these three components. Number one, which was know the drill, which is they have to understand and they have to be very well versed in what the rules are. Who's required to have a mask? What age is it? If somebody has a medical condition, can they go without a mask? They needed to be masters of that information. Step two was making sure that they did their part. So we didn't have problems with staff walking around with masks on their chin or not adhering to social distancing. We want to make sure that they understood that they had to be the model that we wanted our fans to follow. And then lastly, how do you have those conversations with the fans? That we don't threaten, we encourage people. We do it politely. We do it with our paddle signs. We do it with a way that encourages the fan to understand that this is for their safety. It's for the safety of others. It's in their best interest. And we really want them to be able to enjoy the event. But we have to get their compliance in these rules as well. So that was Supporting Safe Stadium. So we contracted with Brainshark to deliver these trainings. And in fact, we've gone with 100% training, online training with all of our game day staff, all of our ushers, ticket takers, gate security, our concierge staff. We went with 100% online training by using Brainshark. Now, again, I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying this is a tool that we used. And that what that does is it allows you to take a PowerPoint presentation that's narrated and to publish it out there. And if you want to, you can actually have a guest book where people sign in, and you can record the fact that they actually took it. How long did they look at it? So did they just look at the first minute of it, or did they look at the full 19 or 20 minutes of it, whatever that duration was? So we found it to be a very effective tool for us. And like I said, we've been using that for all of our game day staff trainings now that we've put online, because doing in-person trainings was something that just wasn't feasible. We had to do a fair amount of recruiting, and so we wanted to make sure that we could do that onboard training and that skill training online as efficiently as possible. So what I will do is I'm going to provide VSG with a PDF version of this presentation, so you will have access to this. And you can also access these links, and you can put the password in, and you can watch these presentations. There aren't any state secrets in this, and I'd much rather let people see kind of what we did. It's not perfect. It's not the be all end all, and I'm sure if we had more time, we probably could have put a little bit more production value in it. But it met the requirements, and the staff feedback we got from it was that it was helpful, it was informative, and it didn't beat them to death. So If you have feedback after watching this and you want to send me an email, I'd love to hear the feedback, good, bad, or indifferent, but we'll make that available to everybody who's here. And then also, this is the contact with Brainshark. Again, I'm not endorsing them. I am just letting you know what we used. And in fact, if you don't know how to take a PowerPoint and record narration and actually put that up as a video, you can do that on YouTube. It's very easy to do. I suggest that you just go to YouTube and look at some tutorials, but you can do that without having to engage with a special partner. You can set up a YouTube channel and you can get things out there without making a huge investment. So I want to wrap up and talk a little about some of the key takeaways, the real lessons learned, or the things that if I had to give other people advice, this is what I would give. First of all is to form a task force. That was one of the key things that made, I think, the Cowboys organization at AT&T Stadium successful. We got everybody together on a team, and we worked cohesively to make sure that we met these challenges and we understood what was going on, and we worked together and we communicated. So that task force was really important, having specific objectives and making sure that we hold to those. The second thing is to treat that task force as a true project management exercise. The leader of our task force wasn't a senior executive. It was actually one of our project managers from our IT department, because IT project management is kind of their thing. And so that person was, and that person was just a coordinator level person. That person was in charge of our Safe Stadium initiative. And that person ran the meetings, convened the meetings, kept notes, basically kept everybody honest and held them to deadlines and all of that. So treating it as a project management process was really important. Building relationships was another key thing, not only just internally, but especially with all of the different agencies that are going to weigh in on what you need to do to reopen and to stay open. We were very lucky in that our relationship with the city of Arlington and our local authorities has always been strong from the time that we opened back in 2009, and even in the year leading up to that, as we were putting together all of our public safety plans. So we were able to take that strong relationship and basically lean on that as we approached all of these challenges and worked together. There wasn't any concern about somebody trying to get away with something, or there wasn't any questioning whether or not somebody was being candid or that they were going to follow through. There was a lot of trust that had been built over the years. And if you don't have those relationships now, then I would put them on a crash course to start working on them. But it's really going to be key to making sure you understand what is necessary for you to get open, and then as you move forward. Communicating is really big. You've got all these different constituents, everything from internal, your staff, and how do you make sure they feel confident about what you're doing and they're knowledgeable and they're being kept informed, to your season ticket holders, to people that are single event purchasers. So all of that communication, thinking about how to do that well and making sure that you're anticipating what people's concerns would be, and you're answering their questions before they have a chance to really ask them. And that's where that whole Safe Stadium branding came about, was to help make sure that we consistently and we cohesively communicated that message. And then last going is the ongoing assessment, that once this is done, it's going to evolve. And as I alluded to earlier, I've had a huge evolution in just the last, 14 hours or so. Governor Abbott has said that he's lifting all of the restrictions, and so that's got some implications for us. So I have no idea what we're doing yet. I'm sure there's going to be some meetings about that, and we're going to figure out how we're going to interpret the lifting of those restrictions. But it's an ongoing thing. It's a moving target. And one of the things that we told ourselves was that while we may have been successful with the event that we just did last Sunday, and as we're gearing up for the next one, we have to assume we're pretty much starting at a zero baseline each time. We don't want to get complacent. We don't want to take things for granted. We want to make sure that we go at this with the same kind of focus and commitment every time, so our staff are fully engaged, the fans are fully aware, and that we're all working together to make sure that we can continue to provide that environment. So we were lucky. AT&T Stadium was able to host not only its kind of typical events, but we were able to get some really, really special marquee events like the PBR World Finals, and of course the Rose Bowl game. And we take a sense of pride that we were able to do that, but it's also with a lot of humility. We wouldn't have done it if we didn't believe we could do it safely. Thankfully, we got through all of these events without having any kind of concern about us being a super spreader. We were never officially contacted in any contact tracing at all throughout the last season. So, we feel like we did our job. We were able to meet that challenge. And it really was a team effort. It was everybody coming together. It wasn't one department's problem. It was everybody's job. We all came together so that we could conceive of, we could develop, and we could plan for, and we could deliver a safe stadium experience. And with that, that concludes kind of my prepared presentation. I'm sorry if I went a little bit long there, but that's our story, and we're sticking to it for today. But it's going to be different in the future, I'm sure. So, Richard, with that.
Great, Paul. Thanks. Thanks very much. That was more than a lot enlightening. I'm sure I join all of our many attendees in thanking you for that incredible insight. We also have quite a few questions, so I'm going to be real quick here and then turn it over to Russ. Please be sure and register for next week. There has never been, hear this, there has never been a better time in any of our careers to take a step back and think about the importance of retention and employee well-being and how we're helping them grow. And we have two people that approach with expertise and experience, hand-on experiential backgrounds as it relates to evaluations, feedback, and organizational surveys. And this is typically an area where most of us check the box because we have to get that commensurate annual evaluation and to give everybody their pay increase. Tune into this and you'll hear some tips and insights that will change the way you operate. And right now, what a great opportunity to do that, since we're all peeling through hopefully the end days of COVID. Also, as we go forward, take just a moment and talk about a couple of our upcoming series. On the 17th, 2 weeks from today, Healthy Air Means Confidence. World experts coming in to talk to you about some simple things you can do in your venue to totally change the way your air is and really have a great story to tell your community, your staff, and your attendees. So don't miss that. For those that are not engineers, it may sound like technical. It is absolutely brilliant. I've seen the materials and the presenters. Following that, we have a way to share with you with some world-class experts as well around reward systems, how to catch people doing things right and get the behaviors you want with some really great tools there. And then we wrap up this series with some terrific tools about how you can now, during this COVID break, do a great analysis about your overall operations inexpensively and effectively, and jump to some great new ways you want to go about doing things. So we really encourage you to tune in, register for all of these. The recording for today's session will be online later this afternoon. And before I turn it over to Russ for questions, which we now have about 25, Paul, we can't thank you enough. That was a phenomenal insight, your usual high quality professional presentation, but also information I think most of us haven't heard. So good luck with what's going to happen next. And Russ, I'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. I'd add to that. Thank you for your insight and your willingness to share, just your straightforward and common view of how to approach these things. I do want to take a couple of comments. And one of the concerns about running a session with AT&T Stadium is like, well, they're the Cowboys and they have all the resources in the world. But if you step back, regardless of facility type and regardless of what your operating situation is, you may not be able to afford this SnapX tool, but you can afford a $49 handheld thermometer. So the idea here is just think about it from a scale standpoint. Each of us has unique operating circumstances and sometimes limits to resources. But if you just step back and say, okay, where are we trying to get to? And if we can't get there from one direction, how do we get there from another direction? So I think the scale is important to understand and really step back and take the insight of the thinking of what they were trying to accomplish. And I love the idea of putting a working group together, which I do all the time, and don't have the top guy lead it. It creates leadership opportunities, it creates maturity. And Paul's comment about IT and their project management thought process is something we should all take to heart. I think that there are a lot of people in our industry that we tend to pigeonhole them in our organizational chart that bring skill sets and capabilities that we're not really sure of. In fact, if you went back in your own organization and you went back and found out who had served in the military and what jobs they did in the military and who might be a volunteer fireman, I think you would be shocked, as I know I have been over the years, as to the capabilities that exist in your organization that you're not aware of today. And what better time what better time to look and understand what those capabilities are as we move forward. So lots of questions, as we mentioned. Even though the webinar was scheduled for an hour, we're staying on until we answer sort of every question. And so for Eric George and Robert Jordan, I think Paul addressed sort of what the new Texas guidelines are. And how refreshing is it for somebody to speak to somebody in a webinar and just say, you know what, I don't know. And by the way, whatever I know tomorrow is likely going to be different in the morning. So I just think that's refreshing, and part of the reason why I just love to hear Paul talk, because he's not blowing wind. He's just treating it like, and listen, he didn't always run AT&T Stadium. He's run lots of different facilities or been a part of different facilities, from performing arts all the way up. And so that's why that scale is really, really important to me. Carol Wallace asks about documents provided by the NFL. And what I would encourage you to do is, you all know how to reach Paul. Paul, I would say without question, Paul does more to share real information in our industry with everybody. And reach out to Paul, and I'm sure he will share what he can. So I think that's just something you can do, and you can do that with Paul, and you can do that with any member of VSG 100% of the time. Did you run into any issues with mobile ticketing for those who did not have cell phones, Paul?
No, we really did not. Not to the level where it became a concern. Usually there was, somebody in a party that had a mobile device, so it wasn't really a problem.
All right. For Denise Montoya, did you have any issues with people who are underbanked and didn't have a card? I know you addressed making a change in your procedures to allow people to go to Walmart. You're fortunate enough to have one across the street, but were there any other results from that?
Well, I was a big advocate for us to have a cash to card machine in the building. And in fact, our original plan, we were going to have only 2 of them. And I thought, that's ridiculous. We need to have these things at least on every level. And that from a guest service and a guest experience standpoint, I was really frustrated with that. But the business, it just didn't make sense. I mean, we had done a lot of research. The company that wanted that, we were trying to strike a deal with, we couldn't come to terms on branding, and the overhead cost was going to be huge. We found out from some other venues that the utilization rate just isn't that high. And so we knew that it was going to be a problem for a few people, and we were just willing to kind of take that on. So, yeah, we do have the Walmart thing, and I know that sometimes that doesn't really seem like a solution to fans, but it was one of those business reality things. I felt like, in the debate, people had to tell me, Paul, get off your customer service bandwagon. This is just a business thing, and we're just not going to do it. I was like, okay. How
about for people like Richard who have flip phones?
We have special attendants that will take care of people that have severe needs.
All right. Marcela Munoz, knowing that there was still about 80% of staff, and by the way, that's tracked across the country, regardless of facility type, were there staggered arrivals or scheduling from the various departments?
We did a bit of that. We did some staggered arrival just because of the additional processing time. So that became an added expense because you're putting people on the clock earlier than you would typically need them. And so that was something that we looked at. And all of it was just about trying to understand the transaction time for all of the check-in process. And I'm really big about that. I really want to understand the science behind, okay, this person's going to go here when, how long is it going to take them to do this thing? And then they go where, and all of that, so that you don't get surprised and you don't find out, look, we're 10 minutes out, from doors opening. We still got staff lined up outside the employee entrance. I'm paranoid that that's going to be the experience, but I think every department found out what they needed to do. And we encouraged them to do that kind of time analysis to figure out what those transactions were going to be and how much time they needed.
Neil Miller asks about, in creating the pods, did you use any physical markings on the seats that were sold? And I think from the pictures we saw that was not the case. Excuse me. But I do want to share a couple things with you. One is that I thought the NFL did a brilliant job at the Super Bowl by interspersing the actual stand-ups in between where the people who were allowed to attend the game, I think some 26,000 people approximately. I just thought that had a terrific look. And I attended on Monday night the fans coming back to T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas in an effort to see what the fans were like and what the staff was like. And they also used a marking device that really brought a lot of color and energy to the bowl. And it's funny, I was thinking about it from the standpoint of SoFi Stadium, and I don't want to buy 40,000 of something, right? And we have two teams, and and we're not going to move them around because that would just be impossible. But coming up with something clever, to be able to put in there. I thought the idea that you had of putting the rally towels when people are coming back for the first time, to be able to help them sort of find out where they're looking instead of trying to read every seat number, that type of thing. This goes back to scale. Like, do what you can. It doesn't always mean that you have to go back and sort of buy. And I'm not mad at the people who sell those products. There are a variety of those products. For me, scale is an issue, but it does make a material difference, both I found from people in the bowl at T-Mobile Arena on Monday night, and also visually from a TV standpoint. And so there are some other clever ideas that people are coming up with. So look forward to people coming up with some new things there. From Leslie Stewart. Hello, Leslie. When third-party staff screening could not be done outdoors, was there a concern with having this done inside the building, especially if someone was suspected of having COVID? What would have been the process if that situation had presented itself? Someone checking in had failed the temperature check or was showing COVID-related symptoms.
Yeah, so we encourage them to maintain social distancing throughout that entire check-in process. So trying to use those things. They were wearing a mask before they were allowed into the building. And I believe we were doing the temperature checks before they went into the building for their queuing up for their check-in process. So, we did what we could in order to maintain the same kind of protections outdoors when we had to move it indoors. And so it's a little bit of a trade-off there, but thankfully we've got a big enough concourse that we could actually do that as well.
Sarah Overman asks about images of the paddle signs. As Paul has just said, he's provided the links, and also this recording will be up on the VSG website here and on YouTube. So you'll be able to take those down from either of those sites. Matt Balk, good morning, Matt. Was testing staff or guests considered? What factors led the Cowboys from make a decision not to test?
So the scalability of what we were doing and the number of personnel that we were dealing with, and also the requirements of the NFL really drove the testing question. So if you were designated within the NFL's plans that you were going to be on the field or you're going to be working in proximity to the team, you're going to be within that bubble, then you were subjected to testing. And so there were some regimens where people were tested 48 hours prior to a game. There were other ones where they were given a rapid test on site at the stadium. So that really drove a lot of what we were going to do as far as that testing. As far as the staff working in general public areas, testing didn't seem to be the a real feasible option for us. And remember, we're going back to, testing is pretty prolific now, but back in September, it was still very wobbly and it was still very, hard to get some of those resources. So we didn't pursue that. Again, we were really leveraging with the staff. If you feel like you can't pass this screening questionnaire by attesting the fact that you are well, that you don't believe you've been exposed and you don't have COVID, then you can come and work. But if you have any of those concerns, then we just don't want you at the stadium. And I think people generally acted responsibly. We only had a couple of situations out of all the event days that we handled where we had concerns about a staff member presenting with symptoms while they were actually at the work site. And that was handled in coordination with our IDER plan, our infectious disease emergency response plan. Those people were contained and they were dealt with appropriately. And I know there was another question about, were there any outbreaks that were traced back to us? We aren't aware of anything. Our local public health authorities that would have contacted us if they were doing a contact tracing effort have never reached out to us formally to try to trace something back to us.
I have been frustrated by the lack of focus on testing. There is one now, just for your information, there is a emergency use authorization for a home testing kit. I actually bought one yesterday. It's $109. In Los Angeles right now, the cheapest antigen test, rapid test you can get is about $80. And the cheapest PCR test, which is the gold standard of testing, is about 125. Ironically, those are both at the airport. I think that I expected by now, and I expect in the not too distant future, that there is going to be some new emergency use authorization for some rapid testing that is going to be down in the $30 price range. And I think that when that happens, I think you will see more testing deployed as a complement to vaccinations and the other things that we're doing. So, but I am personally disappointed that the testing hasn't manifested itself more quickly during this process. Donna Miller Brown, with recent data showing COVID precautions virtually eliminating flu deaths this year. It's funny you would say that because I thought I haven't seen anybody with a cold. Do you have plans to keep any of these COVID editions, hand sanitizers, plexiglass after the pandemic passes? Paul, what do you think?
I mean, my powers of prediction are somewhat limited, but I think where it makes sense and it inspires confidence in our operation, you'll see those things stay. So I think that it's going to be a slow change, even with the magical overnight kind of decision our governor made in Texas with lifting all of these restrictions. I think there's still going to be a level of prudence here, and people are going to expect to still be felt like they're being taken care of and protected. So it doesn't hurt to keep the plexiglass shields up. It doesn't. Now we're 100% cashless. We're packaging food a different way. I mean, a lot of these things are just new ways about going forward. And if it keeps us all that much healthier and more hygienic, then I think we're going to stick with it.
I strongly concur with your decision not to temperature check guests. I mean, right now, over 50% of the known cases are asymptomatic, and so the science doesn't work. On the other hand, I'm a strong advocate, and I have been for a long time, both working on the SARS outbreak in 2003 and Ebola in 2011, that we finally can temperature check our employees. And the reasoning behind this is that many of our casual staff work paycheck to paycheck. They have lots of incentive to try to be at work and not miss a shift. And so I'm not saying it makes anybody a bad person, but people are just coming to work with the flu and with a cold and those kinds of things. And so I am a strong advocate to continue not stop, just continue employee and staff temperature checks going forward. I think that's in the best interest of our enterprises. Michael Marion asks, of the changes you made, which ones will you, I'm sorry, I just did that. Thank you. John Drum, if time allows, can you discuss if your stadium tour program continued over the last year? If so, were there any needed modifications in your guided and self-guided tours inside AT&T Stadium?
Yeah, that's a great question because we initially did shut down our tours, but we restarted in early June, and it was a limited capacity. It was guided tours only, and so we have a self-guided tour program where people basically come in and there's a route they can go on, and the staff are in different spaces and along that route, and so you can go on the field and you can spend as much time as you want, very much like a museum type of experience. We discontinued that during COVID, and we went to guided tours only with smaller groups, and that's pretty much how we've continued to maintain. So we're still doing tours. We're even hosting private events, some field events as well. They're just the self-guided tour program has been shut down right now.
Michael Orvis asks, were there any major differences in operations changes between what you did for the NFL versus the PBR events or Feld events?
Yeah, the Feld events, that was really interesting because Feld, since we were the first thing that Feld was taking back out on the road with Monster Jam back in October, they were very much mindful of what the NFL was doing because they were trying to recreate the same kind of protections around their drivers and their operational personnel for the trucks and their show. They wanted to make sure that they kept them safe as well. So they were trying to, I think, what I interpreted was that they were learning from what they had heard about the NFL process and trying to emulate that in many ways. And so it was really great being able to work with them as their first client to help understand what they were trying to achieve, what we were accustomed to doing, and how we arranged our facility and the everything from where the drivers were going to be having their dressing rooms or their lounges to how their paths were going to be getting out to the field and to their vehicles and all of the maintenance personnel as well. So it was a collaboration. It's really about your event management people listening to those clients that may not have the rigor or the complexity in their organization to think about that in advance, but to provide them good guidance and advice about bringing their event in and what are the appropriate safeguards and appropriate measures and logistics that you think that need to work in your venue to help make sure that they get the level of protection that they need.
So Sarah asked, and yes, Sarah, I am not mad enough to murder your last name. I apologize. She just asked, did you extend any requirements to the organizations who were presenting these events? Other than, was there anything that that you went back to them on? I'm not sure you would have, but I think it's an interesting question that much the same way as organizations put requirements on us for sustainability and other things to bring our events here. In these conversations with the events you produced, were there any things that you sort of required of them?
Well, the whole kind of safe stadium overlay was part of their contracts and their agreement. So mask wearing, all of that was still, making sure that they abided by all of that. They weren't exempt just because they were the client or they were the event participants necessarily. So again, it was trying to engineer it with the cooperation of the client to say, look, this is what allows us to be open and to host fans and to lead to success in your event. So we need you to sign on to these things. But most of this stuff was not contentious at all.
Did you require them to take your training, any of their employees or staff?
We did not.
Did you make it available?
We did.
Okay, great. And that for people, sort of entertaining this kind of discussion, there's probably very little you can do to make a client do certain things. But the idea that you make that stuff available and you hope that they are enlightened enough to engage their staff or make it available to them is just another way to make sure that everybody in the building is aware of all of the operating conditions. Scott Griffith, good morning. Did all your employees get paid for online training?
Yes, they do. So we peg a certain amount of compensation to the time that we believe it will take for them to achieve it, and then they're paid that amount when it's completed.
So Jim Kelly asked 3 questions. 2 of them we've answered already. I'll reiterate: the presentation will be shared to each of you with a YouTube link, Paul has addressed that none of the things that happened at AT&T Stadium were involved in either contact tracing or a super spreader event. But question number 2, did you have any full-time or part-time staff, not contractors, who were not comfortable coming back to work, and how was that handled?
We have had some staff that were not comfortable coming back to work. A lot of it started at the very beginning because they just weren't aware of what protective measures we were going to be able to actually put in place. But we worked with those staff members to find out. I'll give you an example. So, a lot of our event operations team that are typically out and on the concourse and they're interacting with fans and they're all amongst the crowd like that. If I had a staff member that was more concerned about that, or they had particular factors that they thought put them at a greater risk, then we would really minimize their exposure and we would adjust what our expectations for them. Get your teams briefed, get them on their way, but then you can come back down to the office and monitor the event from there. You don't need to be walking the floors for these events. So, I think that was really important, and I think this was brought up in a number of other kind of online things that I've seen throughout our industry, is to remember that we're all people, and that we have to really take we have to make time and space to accommodate everybody, and to realize that people have got, concerns, and we've got to show that empathy, and we've got to make sure that we're addressing it appropriately, and that we can't just kind of whitewash it or just say, look, this is what we're doing and you got to get on board. We have to make sure that we make everybody try to feel as comfortable and confident as well, and ask the question, here's what we're doing. Does that make you comfortable? And if not, what more do you think we could or should do? What kind of accommodation should we make that would kind of get you there, and see where that conversation takes you?
Richard and I have had lengthy conversations about how important that employee engagement is, because at the end of the day, if we can't make our employees feel safe, then we're not going to do a very good job of making our guests feel safe. And that extends beyond the obvious. It extends to our partnerships and our naming rights partners and all of the people who have a vested relationship in the building. This conversation also causes me to think about a recent epiphany I've had, which is, putting people in the right place. And I started thinking a lot about stadiums like yours and mine, Paul. The idea that we put people in the upper decks who are physically able to actually get to the top row and can do it consistently. And I've really started to think more about putting people in the right place, in the right job. And I'm even toying with the idea you would think that the upper deck is the sort of the last bastion, and maybe that's where the new people go or something like that. But I'm wondering now, based on the nature of how much physical exertion there is and the nature of behavior in some of those upper decks, not your or my facilities, but others, I'm not sure that might not be worth a bump in pay. I'm just talking about something else I'm thinking of here in terms of making sure we get the right people and are expressing the right service in these locations. So just a concept that I have. So thanks. Denise asks, did they receive any pushback from patrons at F&B not accepting cash? And I think you answered that there were no issues, right?
No, it's really about just giving people due notice. If you get fans that say, well, if you had told me, then I would have done something different. But, we try to make that abundantly clear. And so, you pretty much had to be really not paying attention to have been aware of some of these big changes.
Yep. Maddie Ballantyne, did you find that all staff completed the training without any technical issues? If they had questions, did they reach out to their supervisors or managers post-training?
Yeah, the delivery of our training is on a pretty robust platform, and there's within the application, if you're doing the training or the presentations you're seeing, there's a way to get help, but it's incredibly stable. The other thing that I really liked about what we're using is that it's pretty much device agnostic. So whether you're doing it on a computer or on a phone or on an iPad or any kind of mobile device, it worked very, very well. So we didn't receive any complaints about staff not being able to make use of that.
And I also want to interject here about scale. Cowboys have resources; they can go out and get a platform. Many of us do; others don't. And I just take note of the iPhone commercials on TV. The whole part about this, I think about this like sustainability and many other things we do. Do what you can, the best you can. It doesn't have to be the fanciest thing in the world. So don't. I really worry about people going, well, I can't do that, so it's not worth me thinking about. Well, you'd be surprised what you can do. And you'd also be surprised, back to an earlier theme, about people within your organization that actually would be excited about being asked to help. Like I said, I think we are way underutilizing the resources that we have.
Russ, if I could just expand on that just real quick, because when we had to take all of our training that we did in person and put it into an online format, I told my staff, I said, look, you can either kind of resent this by saying, I don't want to do this, or the online training is going to be substandard to being in person. I was like, this is a reality, and you can embrace this as an opportunity to kind of expand your skill set and to explore something that's new that is not going to go away, but will be an enhancement to your capabilities as a professional in our industry. And so I'm always trying to encourage folks that say, by embracing change, it's an invitation to innovate. It's an opportunity to be creative, and it's a chance to, not think about the resources that you wish you had that you didn't have, but to creatively look at what do we got and how can we use it. And that's why I wanted to make the statement about, if you didn't know that you can take a PowerPoint and you can narrate it and you can interject video with that and you can record that as an MP4 file and then put that onto YouTube, then explore that, because that doesn't cost you anything. And it may be technology that you're familiar with, and you don't have to subscribe to anything. So I just feel like, rather than resent, let's embrace and let's look at it as being something that can be transformational for our organization, for our industry, but also for you as a professional. You can bolster, your repository of skills and capabilities that will, serve you well in the next step of what you're going to do.
Just to tie that together, I can tell you, Richard and I have found and discussed many times that we have been very, very surprised at how the retainage and the quality from the unexpected quality and retainage from a virtual type of training environment. So, yeah, I mean, old dogs can learn new tricks. So, Phil Ashurst, did the state fire marshal or local city county marshal have overruling authority? Did they have any conflict between them? And did they work well to help your venue?
Yes, I mean, the default is we listen to our local authorities, and I know in turn, they are, whether it's the city level, they're looking at the county level, and the county is looking at the state. So we know that they're playing ball the way that they should, but we really go directly to them because they're the ones that are going to be in our command and control operation. They're going to be the ones that are sending the inspectors to walk around during our events. So it's really important that we're just executing to what they want us to do.
Sam Doors, hanging out up there in Boise. Can you touch on the differences in crowd behavior and policy enforcement / compliance for events with returning guests, cowboy games versus events with one-time guests, PBR, boxing, Monster Jam? Were there additional challenges for the events that weren't typically repeat guests?
Yes, there were challenges. I will tell you that when we did PBR, it was people were not interested in wearing masks. They were very interested in their own decisions around that, and so it was a challenge. We again tried to pick the battles we knew that we could win, and when it came to the NFL games, the mandate from our organization was, let's not throw people out because they're not wearing their mask. Let's encourage them to wear their mask, and then if their behavior is problematic, then we will eject them based off of that. But there was a sensitivity, especially as we were, getting the season started, and there was a lot of scrutiny on what we were doing, that we weren't just going to be, heavy-handed, and we weren't going to be making this an unbearable experience for the fans. So we went at it with a very customer service friendliness attitude to, keep yourself safe, keep each other safe. It's not unreasonable. Wear it as much as you can. I know you're drinking, you're eating. We just ask that you keep your mask on as much as you possibly can. And that's pretty much how we ran that's the default for all of our events. We know that some events were more challenging, and PBR was certainly that audience, for whatever reason, they just, it was hard to get them to comply. So our staff, did the best they could. I would say the biggest challenge is that when the staff feel like they're outnumbered, their mission is completely impossible to execute. That was important for us as a management team, was to make sure that we clearly let them know what our expectations were, so that they didn't feel this obligation to go out there and just, they've got to solve every problem. They got to get every mask. So look, you do what you can and when you can, but most importantly, keep yourself safe. So if you're in a crowd and these guests are not being compliant, get yourself out of that crowd so that you can be at a safe distance. And we're not going to we're not going to say you're not doing your job. So it was really important. The lesson that we learned was to very clearly state what your expectations were, so the staff didn't feel like they were given a task that was impossible to achieve.
Christina Allen, with cashless and focus on mobile, did you reduce your box office hours and push for sales online?
Yes, we basically, stopped selling tickets at the ticket office. All of our sales are online. We have signs with QR codes outside the ticket office, so you shoot the QR code and it'll take you directly to that SeatGeek page to purchase event tickets. So the ticket office transactions at the window were really relegated to some troubleshooting and other very kind of niche issues, but it wasn't the typical retail across the counter operations anymore.
Nicholas Gockel, why, in your opinion, do you think per caps significantly rose during reopening? In talking with our concessionaire and the people who are paying the most close attention to it, I think part of it has to do with the psychology of a thinner crowd. It means that there's just more opportunity, so people felt like they could get faster service. We didn't reduce the points of sale, so we didn't open up just 25% of our concession stands because we had 25% of the crowd there. We wanted to, as the video said from Charlotte Jones, we wanted to still preserve and present the Cowboys experience. So that meant making the investment and having a lot of points of sale available. And so the cycle time was very low. So I think fans were like, hell, it was really easy for me to get a beer and nachos at the start of the game.
I'm going to go back and get something again. And so I think that's what, may have created less of a barrier and more participation.
And we have some pretty good science in terms of right now. The factor is if at 9.2 people in line, the 10th person is generally walking by. So those limitations are that money is staying in that person's wallet. So I think pretty interesting insight there. And part of probably why more of the grab and goes are, and the markets and marchés are being instituted in our facilities, because people don't want to wait. Right. Michael Marion asked, do you anticipate the NFL requiring proof of vaccination for admission in the fall?
We've never been able to predict what the NFL wants, so I have no idea. Who knows? Yeah. And I'll tell you that they won't ask us. They won't ask us, how hard would this be? They'll just tell us what to do.
And it'll be different depending on jurisdiction. I mean, I would tell you that my view is I think we're going to be looking at some kind of hybrid, some kind of vaccination, some kind of acceptable test within a period of time. But the problem that exists today is, so far, whether on the state level or the federal level, there's no single source of truth. So you could have all of that, but how are you going to be able to figure out who's actually had it, who hasn't? I've had a first shot. I have a card. I get my second shot tomorrow, but I could take that card and make 100. I could make 100 of those for everybody. So I think I'm hoping that this gets more attention quickly, because I think this is going to be problematic for us and will limit our abilities going downstream.
Yeah, and I would think that also, what you might be seeing in Europe, where they have you get some sort of credential that's issued to you, like a ticket or something. If there's concerns in our country about civil liberties and privacy and things like that we have to overcome, that some other countries don't have those concerns or those issues. So it'll take some engineering. We'll just have to see how that goes.
Agreed. Gregory from Tampa, we just finished hosting the Super Bowl. Curious as to how you manage some of the larger events and the outside companies as it relates to COVID compliant. We did well with the daily meetings and each entity included, and continuing to make the focal point with each meeting. So did you have issues with outside contractors and presenters?
By and large, no. I would say, though, that we got nowhere near the complexity of Super Bowl planning and execution that you guys went through in Tampa. So congratulations to you for pulling that off, because the number of outside contractors we have are pretty narrow, because we typically work with preferred vendors or known vendors, and so they know that they're being held to that standard. All of our contracts have an addendum to them that require them to comply with all of these things, and that includes the training. So our legal department is trying to make them play ball with us as much as possible. But again, I want to say congratulations to all you guys in Tampa, because that must have been a hell of a lift, and hats off to you for getting it done.
Yeah, I will echo that. It was clear that this was the most complex Super Bowl ever conducted, and you guys did it with great class, and really, really admire the effort that you guys put forward. So our final questions from Carl Hall. As regulations are changing, how do you enforce face masks being worn? Our staff encourages patrons to wear the mask, but as the crowd grows, they're hearing, I'll wear mine when you make them wear theirs. And I will tell you, the recent announcements in Mississippi and Texas are, I had I'm not going to say an argument, but a challenging conversation with my Uber driver this morning. Like, well, we don't have to wear masks anymore. And I'm like, why do you think that's a good idea? So those two moves are going to extend to the other 48 states, and it's going to exacerbate everything that you're trying to do safely for both your staff and your guests going forward. So interesting challenge. Richard, I think we're going back to you.
Yeah, and again, on behalf of all of us in the VSG family, Paul, thank you so much. Phenomenal. And Russ, as always, thanks for your great leadership and the facilitation of the questions. I think we had 26 or so questions, and we're as enthusiastic on the last one as the first one. So it's a fun part of doing these free webinars. I do want to encourage you. First, the recording will be up later today, and you can share that link. So if there's people within your organization or friends in the industry that you go, wow, I heard Paul today, or Russ and Paul were answering some questions that were really helpful, share it. It's free, and we're happy. That's what we're doing. Like what we all do in this industry is we give it away. I don't think there's another industry like it. So please be sure, keep an eye out for that. If you don't get it, email me and we'll make sure you get it, but you will get an email link later today on that. And then finally, next week, Lisa Woods, who lives in this organizational survey world, and Michael Marion, who has experientially done more around evaluations and leadership development feedback than any two people I know, will be a part of a session that, while on first blush you may go, yeah, do I really need this? Yeah, you really need it. None of us are on top of the way we could utilize evaluations and feedback and organizational surveys like we're able to. So I really encourage you to show up, listen, and hear some incredible tips about how you can enhance and improve your ability to lead and grow and be a part of your organization, enhance retention, impact the bottom line, and create a level of culture and enjoyment with your staff that you just really would be hard to imagine. So thank you again for joining us, and that'll be the end of today's session. Until next week, thanks, signing off.